Hello? And welcome to the Paper Soprano podcast. I am your host, and my name is Heidi Schneider. And today, hold on to your hats, buckle your seatbelts, because we have a very special guest on the podcast today, and I can't wait to get into some good old-fashioned chatting with our guest. So we should probably introduce you. Kyle Lewis is here with us on the podcast today. Kyle, hello, welcome.
Hello. I'm imagining that like minor applause sound where it's
Yes,
like the yay
woo!
clapping. I know we're not going to edit that in, but I'm imagining it, and I'm hoping people at home rewind and then do that too.
Yes, 100%. That's mandatory for sure.
Now, Heidi, I'm a little bit salty because you told me to hold on to my hat, but you told me just slightly too late. It blew out in the wind, and I lost my hat.
Well, dude, you know what? This podcast is not liable for any lost hats. I don't know if you read that in the fine print when I sent you the contract for this episode, but...
Yeah, hat tape was in my writer, so...
Okay. Well, I mean, it is what it is. I'll reimburse you at some point. My people will call your people. Okay, so who the heck are you? Can you, introduce yourself a little bit? People want to know.
Who the heck am I?
Yeah.
I'm 25. 25 years, medium.
Yes.
So we met at Stony Brook, probably like a good deal of people who may or may not have been on the podcast. I haven't kept track of all your guests. I'm sorry. I'm going to out myself as a...
How could you? No, I'm just kidding.
I know.
I don't give a crap.
We were office roommates. That's how we know each other.
Yes.
And I studied as a composer there. I don't know. I feel sort of weird when people are like, who are you? Because it's sort of like, and maybe I think you've already talked about some stuff like this regarding like imposter syndrome and stuff. But it's also sort of like, I feel like whatever you are is kind of like stuff that you're actively doing. And I haven't, because of the quarantine and everything else, I haven't been actively doing a ton. So,
well, I mean, I get that totally. Yeah. I think that totally contributes to imposter syndrome a lot when you're like not in it to win it, and not even not in it to win it, but when you're not actively doing those things, like we were, think about us 1.5 years ago. You know what I mean? Okay. We were killing it. We were passing each other.
Doe-eyed.
Yeah, doe-eyed, bushy-tailed, all of these amazing adjectives. And, it was just so different than it is now. And all of that aside, though, tell us a little bit more about your educational background before Stony Brook.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I went to a pretty small K-12 school, and I thought for a long time I was going to do science or medicine or something relating to the very profitable STEM fields. And I got really into music in middle school, but didn't ever think oh yeah, I should do that. Sure. And then I remember talking to one of my friends in, I think probably junior year of high school. So it was pretty late game. And I was playing in a band and writing a lot of music for that and taking some music classes at school. I didn't really have a classical background.
Me either. So we're on the same page.
Yeah, it was sort of weird to go. I was playing in a kind of a metal band-ish type thing.
Nice.
And in choir at school, but our choir was aggressively mediocre.
You hate to see it.
You hate to see it. We didn't sight read ever for any reason.
Right.
So that was the first time I did that. Really was I mean, I did it for all state exercises, but the first time sight reading in a class for just oh hey, we're gonna sing this piece today, here's the music, was in college. And I was what? People just look at it and go.
Reading? Oh my god, what?
I'm illiterate. Thank you.
No, dude, seriously, same. I did not know how to read music, even start to learn the process of reading music until oh god, well into high school. We just didn't. And even then, in high school, I wasn't really reading the music. I would write in all of the solfege syllables on my paper, immediately next to all of the notes. So I wasn't actually reading letter names. I was just memorizing the distance between intervals. And
right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah.
I actually had it was a weird experience. So I had in my undergrad we did and actually also in my high school and my undergrad we did scale theory numbers. So instead of solfege, movable, or fixed, it was kind of like movable though, but it was 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 instead of, and then you would alter syllables. Like if it was in minor, you'd sing 1 2 thra, which is really funny.
Yeah,
And so
dude.
we did that in undergrad, and then in choir in undergrad we did movable though, and then in Stony Brook Pear Bear does fixed dough. So I've done all
Yeah.
three systems poorly.
Yeah, dude. I have actually also done all three systems. Only numbers has been my least experienced. I did numbers like we had basically I think 8 semesters of theory at Fredonia for my undergrad, and for the last 2 semesters it was like advanced theory, and we had to switch from movable dough and like modes and stuff, and singing in modes and singing with movable dough, to numbers to sing atonal music. So it was like, okay, cool, like way to just build me up to knock me down, like awesome.
Right.
And then of course we went and at Stony Brook we did fixed dough, which I was even more upset about.
I think everyone is. I mean, I don't know. I think it ends up being fine.
Yeah.
It was weird for me in undergrad because we did scale degree numbers. So 1 to 3 was a major or minor third, depending on, major or minor key. And then we went to, when we did atonal stuff, we switched to pitch class clock numbers. And so 1 to 3 was a whole step from C sharp, D flat to, D sharp, E flat. And so it was like very unsettling to sing 1 3 and like kind of like using that sort of solfege esque like memorized interval type thing.
Yeah.
But have that interval be entirely different interval now. I found it and I actually found out since then my undergrad has moved to movable though. So without continuing to talk about solfege systems, I did go to school after high school. So yeah, my buddy, I was talking to a buddy in high school, and he said like, what if I was like saying I really wish I could just like study music and not like like my dad was a doctor and I thought that's what I was gonna do, or like something related to science or something, and I was like, yeah, I really wish I could study music instead. And he was like, well, why don't you just like go to college for music? And I was like, oh yeah, shit, that's like something people do.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing that. I went to the University of Georgia. I doubled in music composition and music theory. And I know sometimes those are like the same degree at places, but they were 2 different degrees of mine. It really effectively was like a few more electives and then a theory thesis.
Sure. That's awesome.
But I get to brag that I doubled, so.
Yeah, dude. That's intense. I feel like as a performance major myself, and having experienced other performance majors, and even when I was an undergrad, I was an ed major. I was education, not performance. But the adversity, like the way that people treat theory is so negative just in general. Like people hate music theory, and it's so interesting to me that's like, I mean, I didn't personally hate theory. I thought it was interesting. It wasn't very good, but like I also had zero experience and only started like being able to identify the like literal letter names on a staff in high school. And like I think that has a lot to do with people hating it. Like education in elementary school and middle school for music is so bad in terms of theory and in general. You know what I mean? Like people are just upset that they don't know it better. And I'm like, dude, I get you. I feel you.
I think it's sort of a mix of things. So like, I think one of the largest problems with theory is that you need so much like working information to get to the bits that get to be interesting.
Yeah.
Often, unless your teacher's being really careful. Hold on, my cat's begging to sit in my lap. Sorry, I had to pick her up. So
That's okay.
You need so much working knowledge in theory to like make like interesting points, right? So once you get like down the road and you get to stuff where there's like legitimately like complicated, interesting harmonies with like late post-tonal harmony, or you get into like with like late tonal harmony, or once you get into post-tonal harmony and like trying to understand like maybe not some of the more fixed systems like serialism or integral serialism, where
Uh-huh.
it's almost. I mean, they have also like late game stuff that gets really interesting, but like I think most of the time theory gets to be the most satisfying when you get to like make claims and points and say, hey, this isn't super
Yeah.
clear, or this is how I think someone's going to experience this based off of this.
Oh, dude,
And
for sure.
yeah, and that's like the most satisfying part of it. But I think one of the things that really sucks is that you need so much introductory working information oftentimes to get to any of those beginning points that like I feel bad because you'll have undergrad kids who you have to like get them through a few semesters of this where they're just talking nuts and bolts and shop, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't really get to points where it's like, now how do you use all this information that you have to like make artistic claims about something?
Yeah.
And it's like you can like sprinkle it in other places. Like I when I taught Music 119, which is Stony Brook's for the the layperson, Stony Brook's like music theory for non-majors, or like remedial theory for
Mm-hmm.
majors class. Um, it's there was like a day that we were talking about like rhythm and meter, and we talked about like, hey, do you really feel like this is this meter or this meter in a it was like a clipping track. It's an a cappella vocal track, and it's basically the same rhythm, but it's just kind of determining like how big do you think the beats are.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's a very interesting conversation because you can start getting into like as shallow or deep it is as you want. You can say like, oh, this is just how it feels, or this is how I feel like with the way that the performer's accenting this, or
Mm-hmm.
you can get into like, well, expectations based that we would get from like attendance theories that are based on like
Mm-hmm.
cognitive science would expect us to like more guess towards this tempo range than this tempo range.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
those things can be really interesting conversations even at an early time, but most of the conversations you're gonna have in theory that like get to be juicy and fun, it's like you need to learn so much just to get there.
For
And
sure. Yeah,
if you
it's a
don't have that
lot.
kind of like almost math like obsession with like
Yes.
just loving how nuts and bolts work,
Right.
it's really hard. And when people say theory is like math, I think that's really what they're getting at, is that like I don't think theory and math are that similar
Right.
in practice, but the feeling of like most of it feels like nuts and bolts until you get to like late stage
Exactly.
is
Like,
very similar.
I think I totally like understand where you're coming from, and I can't agree more about the like theory is math kind of thing. I I feel like I was wrongly placed in AP calculus in high school. I am not that intelligent, and I just had these really like rock star teachers who were just so good at teaching. Like they literally like the whole school was in AP calculus, but like I have a lot of experience with math and using it as like an exercise and going through these like really mundane memorization but also like activity kind of deals where you're just kind of doing things for the sake of doing them and understanding how formulas work and blah blah blah. And that's really similar to my experience with music theory. The only thing that also complicated my experience with music theory, and I think everyone can relate to this in some way, is that when you're when you're using music theory, like you're usually accompanying it with an oral skills class at the same time. So it's
Right.
like the oral skills part usually moves faster than the theory part. So it's like the oral skills part, they expect you to be able to read music and sing and be able to recognize these patterns and rhythms and whatever, and be able to effectively read before you've really truly been able to sit and master all of these nuts and bolts of music theory. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think those two things are very much intertwined, but a lot of the times are just kind of that connection is glossed over. And that's why I think a lot of people struggle with like, it's like doing, did you ever play Around the World when you were in elementary school? Like that math game where you had to do like times tables or whatever, when you would like, basically you would like stand up next to somebody's desk and you would do like immediate like math facts, and they'd be like, what's 7 times 8? And they're like, okay, what's 47 minus 12? And you'd have to like spit it out really quick. But like it's like trying to do that before you've even really learned what numbers are. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's how I feel like
Yeah.
trying to sight read without theory knowledge is like, you know?
The skills don't tend to develop for most students at the same time. No. And I think for me, like my theory because I was really good at like picking up on nuts and bolts. So I loved math,
Mm-hmm.
and so like things that are like logical systems like that, I really like just bathe in.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, when that was going on, I would oftentimes like use my theory chops that I was like kind of picking up to sort of like make a lot of educated guesses for oral skills,
Yeah,
because
for
I don't think
sure.
I like intuitively got. And I think that's something that's weird. It's like especially as you get older, like learning that like there's so many different kinds of intelligence and valuing them. And I think that like, especially with our like very like STEM focused and often like masculine STEM focused
Mm-hmm.
sort of society, that we really value that sort of logical
Yeah.
like puzzle type
Right.
intellect so well, that like I did really well and was like really, something that I liked.
Yeah.
um it took me a long time to really like understand that like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of other people who are like much more emotionally aware than I am, or there's a lot of people who are much more like really adept at adapting, like picking up like physical skills. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's people who can pick up, like, I don't know, if we were judging people societally as equal as, like logical skills, intelligence, as much as like the ability to like learn physical talents, like,
Sure.
juggling a soccer ball, or I don't mean even like playing an instrument. Like I can do those things, but it takes me so much longer than
Yeah.
other things I do. And I think like I don't pick up on those things as quickly as someone else who has like a little bit more like innate sort of natural puzzle solving with like a physicality aspect to it.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that going off of what you're saying with like the physicality aspect, I think that's something for me and for singers in general that is like a kind of like a benefit or a bonus when you're trying to learn oral skills and theory is
mhm,
like usually singers have, I mean, I'm generalizing here, but for me personally, I feel like I had a really good ear and I was able to basically just memorize these tunes. Like I'd be able to play them or sing them through once and be like, okay, great, I got it. And then there was no, there was no reading aspect really after that. It was more of just memorize to perform it. And then, I was able to do that. And that kind of was a hindrance as well as like a help in a way. Because like
mhm,
when I don't have to do the like logical kind of step by step nuts and bolts kind of approach to it, I don't have to know that it's a Phrygian tune and I don't have to understand that it's in 9/8 and there's, a measure of rest here and blah, blah, blah. I just memorize it after I hear it once or twice and then I can regurgitate it. I
right.
think that's a lot of fault with oral skills, but at the same time, those skills come with music as it is. Music is this kind of ability to internalize these things and be able to perform them back and then understand them afterwards too. So it's
Right.
like you kind of learn by doing it, but I don't know. It's very strange because you're totally right. There's definitely a lot of different people who are in the music field and like everybody's approach is so different. You know what I mean?
I think, yeah, and when you're talking about like advantages or legs up or like even just exposure, there's like different things that I think that like, yeah, so like singers obviously have some sort of like oral skills, just being like, especially because like a lot of the testing involves like not just like your internal ear, but your ability to take that internal ear and then externalize it through singing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And there's some people who have like I think a lot of trouble converting it, where they're like, I can hear the interval in my
Yeah,
head, but I have a really shaky time intonating that with my
for sure.
voice.
Yeah,
And so then
100%.
I get lost because I'm singing a major third, basically halfway between a major third and a minor third.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm getting out of key, and so on and so forth. So like, I think there's those advantages, but also like, I remember like especially like when like first like chewing on harmony in ear training and in oral
Mm-hmm.
skills in undergrad, like there was like kids who had especially like more classical backgrounds than me, and
Mm-hmm.
especially like people who were like playing in orchestra or band in high school, which my high school was too small. It didn't have either of those things. We didn't even have marching band. Um,
Sure.
and it was like when they would be like, oh, these harmonies, you hear how like this, like that sort of Western classical, functional tonality, that
Yeah,
people would be
right.
like, oh, don't these things feel like natural or conclusive, or don't they feel like they should go here or
Yeah.
there? Like a lot of that is like related to exposure to that kind of music and how the logic of that harmony works
For
orally.
sure, yeah.
And I had like no conception of that because I was listening to, a lot of tonally influenced music in the sort of popular realm, of course. But like I had a pretty big background in listening to things that were super modal or atonal from being like a big metalhead and into like some of the like more fringe, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like really like grotesque sorts of metals. And then like also a lot of stuff that was like ambiguously tonal, but like really more tertian than, specifically like functional tonality from, more like mainstream forms of metal and punk and pop music and indie rock and stuff. And so like, and then when I was like making music on my own with my band, a lot of that was more about like my physical relationship to the guitar instead of like a conceptual relationship to a specific canon of harmony. And so like I would be like looking for fingerings and sounds that made sense and felt good. And so a lot of that was more explorative and it was just weird like when people like, and that's something I ran into when I ended up teaching the first year of oral skills for undergrads at Stony Brook. And it's something that's weird. Is like, when you have someone who's not exposed to that. So I think a lot of those Stony Brook undergrads, it's sort of a mix of people who have like a good background of like doing classical stuff, and then just people who are studying music because they're interested in music from some other realm. Which I think is everywhere, but I think especially Stony Brook undergrad.
Stony Brook undergrad is very unique compared to other music,
right?
Quote music school undergrads. You know what I mean? It's very different in terms of the undergrad population.
Right. And so, like I'd play them like cadential 6/4s. And really it took me that whole year just trying to get people to like understand and hear cadential 6/4s as something that like I have been entrained to hear as like big breaks. And then I'm like, don't you guys hear this as like a big stopping moment? Like it's like, screaming at you. And they're like, a lot of these students are just like, no. Yeah. It doesn't sound like that to me.
I know.
Any bit at all.
It's totally bizarre, but for the longest time, I had a very difficult time hearing plagal cadences. I had no concept, like, and I even, like, grew up in a Roman Catholic church. Like, I was forced to go to church every Sunday. And, like, for some reason, still, it was so hard for me to identify it and be like, yes, I think I know what that sound is. Like, I could hear it, but it didn't really make a ton of sense in a way. And also, like, I totally agree what you're saying with the cadential 6/4 thing. I think a lot of Western music is just like the whole like passing down of this tonal tradition is just a lot of assumptions that you have heard it before and you agree that it is so powerful and that it is. And I personally think that it is. It does have a lot of ground to stand on for sure in my mind. But like for someone who didn't, grow up in the United States listening to all of these things in my specific demographic and, all of the specific things that I have in my life, like they might literally be like, yeah, that doesn't really sound very powerful to me. Like, sorry,
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm hoping academia will get increasingly better about, and I think that the trend is definitely it's definitely starting, and I'm interested to see if that's a trend that like gets committed to genuinely or it's just sort of like tokenism, but like just not treating this as like music theory universally or like, also, but specifically like highlighting that a lot of these skills are just distinctly from the Western common practice tonality tradition. Yeah. And then I think, there's really one of two ways. You say either this is, studying this specific thing and really acknowledge like, yeah, this is a very limited range of music, or you update your curriculum and say like, we also are going to look at things and other things. Like, I don't know. I really could think like your training could be great to be like, let's dictate pop melodies, or let's like, talk about 12-bar blues form. Like, I don't get why we wouldn't talk about that just as much as we talk about something like sonata form or rounded binary. Like 12-bar blues is, or like just even the 4-chord pop progressions, like, 1, 5, 6, 4. Yeah. So much more influential to so much more music that I think even students are listening to, And so like, I am not someone who thinks that like Western classical music is not useful or wonderful or a deep, rich tradition. And I also don't think that, there's any reason to oust it. And I do think that like there's some museum effort happening of like keeping those cultures alive in ways that I've really benefited from because I wasn't involved with them before I got involved in undergrad, and I really love them now. But I also think that like it's going to be exciting to see universities and music traditions do better to like be very inclusive of, you know, the multiplicity of musics that are there. And even if they don't change to, you know, be more broad scale music curricula, to at least like be more open about that.
Yeah.
You know, saying like, look, this is, you know, not music theory. This is the theory of this kind of music.
Right, exactly. I think that's huge, and something that for sure, once certain generations start, you know, not being in charge of things, and certain, you know, demographics start coming in and being like, hey, why aren't we talking about this type of music, or why are we ignoring this completely, or like, I personally feel like I would love to have taken a class on like very traditional styles, or like just the whole Asian tradition of like Asian music. You know what I mean? We completely, and not even including like Indian music, because I feel like that has a very specific set of music theory, and like I don't know about you or what your algorithm shows you, but I feel like I get videos of all of like the Indian rhythm
like the Karnika or whatever.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
I'm messing up that term, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I think if you're listening to this and you know what we're talking about, let us know if we're saying it wrong. But like,
I'm definitely saying it wrong.
Okay. And I don't even know what it is. So like, but I'm so interested in other styles of traditional music, you know? And I have also been recently, in the past couple of weeks, the algorithm has shown me a lot of Native American music and like Native American throat singing and traditional styles of that genre, and I'm like, oh my god, this is incredible. Like, like where has this been, and why have we not? I don't think I've ever even heard one of my professors in my life, you know, no fault to you or anything, professors, but like no one has even mentioned Native American traditional music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that hasn't even come up.
I wouldn't have any
you know?
radar on that except for like ambiguously like generic and potentially problematic like flute albums you'll see at like, you know, like rootsy places.
Sure.
You'd be like, oh, this is like Native American flute music, and I don't know how genuine that is. You know, I have no compass on that.
And it's so hard to tell because like even within our Western culture of music that we know and love, like I just wrote an entire paper on Mozart's Die Entführung aus dem Serail, which is the abduction from the Seraglio. And literally the whole thing is like, oh yeah, it's, you know, like if you know the show, if you know the opera, you know it's laden with racism and exoticism, and it's designed to be like a play on Turkish music, because at the time, you know, like Vienna was very much negative towards the Turks, and they were at war and blah blah blah. There's a whole bunch of history, but like the whole thing is like whenever the Turkish pasha or whenever anybody starts singing and they're from like the Turkish realm, they have a very specific style of music. And unfortunately, because Mozart was such a monster, I mean not in a bad way, like a monster composer, and like he was such a monster.
Since Mozart was a monster, he was a drunk. His father was abusive.
No, but since he was so huge and like everybody was like, yeah, Mozart, heck yeah. That style of like Turkish style has become like almost accepted by people who don't really understand that it was like a caricature of Turkish music. And that's so unfortunate because like, you know, that I'm sure, I have no knowledge of like actual, you know, viable Turkish music, but I'm sure, as all cultures do, it has a very rich culture and deserves to be understood in its organic way, you know? Mm-hmm. And not through the lens of Mozart's whiteness. No, sorry, I was just further jabbing at Mozart. You know me.
You gotta pick on your good opera boy.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna take us away from theory just for a hot sec, and I'm gonna ask you, because I know that as a composer, and also, hi, if you're listening to this and you have no idea what we're talking about here, or you are not involved in music at all, and you're not interested in music, like, hey girl, you're gonna be fine, okay? Like, everything's okay. And, you know, if you're totally not musical in a theory way, like, that's totally chill. I'm about to ask you, Kyle, a question about your career path, and
Oh,
I know, don't be scared. It's literally
why
so
did you
fun.
hurt me in such this way, Heidi?
Don't be scared. Don't be scared. But basically, so if you're a non-musical and you're listening to this, you probably have a conception in your brain of what a composer is. And when I say somebody is a composer, you probably are thinking of Mozart. You're probably thinking of a bunch of dead white guys who have powdered wigs and wear tights and high heels, which is totally chill. We love that. But there are living composers that are alive today, and Kyle has mentioned previously in this podcast that he is a composer. He has studied composition. And Kyle, I want to ask you to describe, what do you think about that, like, perception of the composer as it has been bestowed upon you, and, like, how do people react when you tell them that you are a composer?
Oh man, yeah, that's a really I'm gonna give you the hot one, Sean Evans. That's a really, interesting take. It's a great question. Thank you.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Next, I'm gonna say you look like Justin Timberlake. Not really, but
Yes.
that's what they always say about him.
I get that all the time,
Um,
10 times a day.
right. um, yeah. So I think this is like a sort of a complicated and multifaceted question. So first off, I don't know as far as like career path trajectory wise, like, and maybe this is evident of the field. I don't know if I am the like prototypical what you think of as a composer at this point, and I think that existence is increasingly common. That like who composers are, especially if you like talk about it from like a career aspect, is increasingly sort of like varied and complicated.
Yeah.
But I can kind of give the Spark Notes version of those sorts of career paths. So generally, I think that composers in America, and I'm guessing in other places in Western culture, and I think to a certain extent in like East Asian cultures, tend to study at university level.
Right.
Oftentimes, it's involving some form of undergrad and grad school. Usually, if you're going to be a career composer, you do go on for a DMA or a PhD. It kind of depends on the program, or something equivalent. Or if not, you're getting like sufficient like career experience, probably after like an undergrad or a master's. But you have to have pretty good luck or pretty good success to do that.
Right.
What they actually do functionally as career folks really depends. So the number of people who have jobs like you kind of imagine Beethoven as like, I'm writing music and that's my primary thing I do, and I do that for money,
Yeah.
is pretty small. And the number of people who do that and do that almost exclusively tend to be really large names, at least in our field. And also, I think, generally get a lot of large ensemble commissions, or at least a few a year. And so if you're not writing a lot of band music, or you're not one of the lucky select few who get invited into the cult of the orchestra club, you're probably not someone who's making primarily your money just off of commission. So as a result, composers tended to take other aspects of career paths to make the money.
Right.
And the most sort of old school common version of that was to get into professorship. Academia obviously is a complicated and weird place always, but especially now, as a lot of the money is getting sucked up by admins, and they're not really valuing the long-term skills of professorships by decreasing, tenure track positions.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole complicated and socioeconomic political discussion that I'm, not sure we want to get into. But
Right.
so all that's going on. So the professorship's still a thing, still a viable thing, but it is, I guess, less sort of just like, you're a composer, go study at university, go get your doctorate, go do professorships. I don't know if that was ever just like a one-to-one path, the way that they kind of sometimes sell that. But I think it's especially complicated now with just how poor public funding for school is in America at this current moment.
For sure.
So I think a lot of composers are now also doing other things. So some composers more or less have entire other jobs, and they do something else for money, and they also write music, which is weird because I got into music composition at the undergrad level because I was playing in bands, and I thought, oh, it's not really a viable career to like want to play in a punk band for the rest of my life. And then as I got like further and further into like composing in academia, I'm like, this is exactly like playing in a punk band. Like you just need a different gig so you can continue to write music and hope it gets picked up by other people.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's also, I think they're calling this alt academia, but like other academic related jobs. So like, I know there's some composers who do stuff like, if they don't end up doing tenured professor positions, they do stuff like run sound engineering for like recording concerts at universities, or they get involved in like administration somehow at universities, which I don't know. It's, I think, a complicated discussion because I think administration is part of the problem right now. But if those are the jobs that are available, it's also sort of hard to blame someone who needs work.
100%. I think that that's a huge point. Academia, as it stands nowadays, is also facing a huge change because of COVID. Like, I am currently employed by the university as a graduate assistant, and even just in my employment of this semester, I've experienced like extreme immediate budget cuts, and like the universities that already don't have a ton of money are like, oh crap, now we really don't have any money, because like the whole university system is honestly based off of the student as the cash cow. So when the students, specifically undergrads, when they don't live on campus, that's a huge, unbelievably huge amount of money that's coming away from the university. Like, if you think about how expensive it is to live as an undergrad and then also to eat as an undergrad, and like just in general to, you know, keep the lights on in university buildings, like it's super expensive. And the students who either deferred this semester or they, you know, they went online and they didn't live on campus, so there was no reason for housing. Like, universities are struggling financially even more. So it's like, I'm a little bit nervous because I know a lot of people who are adjuncts right now and they're hoping for tenure or they're hoping for full-time positions. Like, I feel for you, you know, that's academia is a scary place. Like, you know.
Yeah, it's complicated, and it's sort of like there's a lot of, you know, there's some things that are entirely like unrelated to people's decisions making, right? Like COVID is something that no person decided to do. That plays a role in it. And there's also this larger trend of like mismanagement and like greedy capitalist influence in academic spaces, which is part of like the admin and the like, you know, university president problem. Shout out to like Stony Brook's last president. I'm pretty sure like embezzled a whole bunch of money, which is why he went to the other school. So
yes. That's cool. Oh my God. I heard about that. There was like a whole bunch of articles on it, which is like
real scumbag.
Yeah, real
I'm gonna get
terrible.
Like a cease and desist for, you know, no one's actually gonna do that because, you know, I mean, this podcast will blow up. Now I don't get a cease and desist. Like, I don't even go to your school, man.
Everything's fine. This is public information, y'all.
What'd you say?
I said, this is public information, y'all. I'm not trying to oust anybody. Like, girl, you did something wrong. I'm gonna be like, hey, I saw an article on it, so sorry. Gotcha.
So there's like all of that, right? So the admins are like this greedy ghoul class that are like, you know, sucking up all this money, landlord style. And then there's also, you know, ever since the economic crisis of, you know, the aughts that we all lived through, funding for public universities has gotten like majorly slashed and never come back. And part of this is like, you know, related to this like a cult of anti-intellectualism and anti-elitism, that kind of, you know, the anti-intellectualism coming from sort of one side of the aisle politically and the anti-elitism coming from another side of the aisle politically, which sort of also supports elites, even though it claims it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
It's weird. So I don't know. The whole thing's a mess. Academia is in a weird spot. I'm hoping what happens is that, you know, this is the middle movie of a trilogy that where academia, you know, reforms itself into being something that is, you know, more beneficial, because I think it used to be like you go to college and you get a really dope job or something, and then as it's gone on, it's like, I think learning should be more of the focus, but it's a very different scenario now where the degree isn't just like a fancy enough piece of paper where people are like, yeah, we definitely want you and we want to give you a lot of money.
Yeah, it's
So
definitely like when during my undergrad, I think the main focus was like literally about how there are no jobs in your field, and basically you're going ahead with this music education degree, and there's one music teacher at every single school, and you either are going to have to move to find that, or you're going to have to really
right,
fight to do it, or you're going to be so underpaid that you're going to be at multiple schools and you're going to have to transition through the day, or you're going to be music on a cart. And they just kind of like threw these really brutal like cold water facts on everybody, like these undergrads who are coming in who are like, I want to be a music teacher, and they're like, cool, you're never gonna be one. And it's like, okay,
right.
God, which is totally not true. Like Fredonia has a really really high success rate for placing teachers, and like I think in a way that's kind of the reason why they did so well, is because they really like kind of scared us in a way, which is kind of rude, but like also fine, whatever. They were just like, listen, you have to be the best of the best because there's already no jobs for you. So, like, if one comes along, you better, like, wow people, because if you don't, like, you know what I mean?
I
So,
also feel like that sort of culture, because I didn't really get a lot of that in my undergrad, which I feel like, for was really positive in some ways and
mm-hmm,
really detrimental in others. Um, but definitely got like that's definitely the culture at Stony Brook where they're for me at least, I don't know if you feel less so or more so than Fredonia, but for me at Stony Brook it was a lot of like there is no path here. You're going to be wandering in the woods and you're going to be wishing for the best of luck, and it's I think especially as a grad student in like an area that's very far away from your home and
mm-hmm,
meeting not people. And I know I didn't have other composers that came in my year, so like it didn't dawn on me until like a year in that like how like weird and lonely not having like a cohort was.
yeah,
I mean, obviously there's other first years, my year, you and I came in the same year, but like
mm-hmm,
no, other people specifically doing the things I was doing.
right.
Um,
It's
and
very
so yeah,
interesting. It's
oh,
like
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Stony Brook is so weird like that because it's like,
Yeah,
it's very small. And even just in my program, like literally when I came in, there was like 9 singers total.
right.
Like that
Yeah,
was it. And coming from Fredonia, there was over 100 singers. Like
right.
easily, no question.
At
And
UGA, we had like 30 or so composers at my
yeah.
undergrad, and most of them were undergrads, and so like very different from like Stony Brook, where I think I like in periphery met a couple of undergrad composers, but mostly it was
Mhm.
like we have like 10 to 15 graduate composers, and I don't know, when you're like interviewing, that seems like cool and like wow, I'm gonna be part of this like elite group of like really smart, talented people, and then you get there and you're like, I want friends, man.
I know. And you know what? That is
um,
such a huge problem with, I think, not even just Stony Brook. Stony Brook, it is small and it kind of makes it more magnified and amplified, but it's like in general, I don't think people who go to grad school are prepared for how different socially it's going to be to undergrad.
grad.
So
Oh yeah,
if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're an undergrad and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to go to grad school and it's going to be the same and it's going to be like, party time USA and I'm going to have so many
it's
friends.
not the same.
Girl, yeah, you are in for it, okay? Because it is not the same because so many people, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but like so many people who are in grad programs are at various stages of their life. Like
Yeah.
literally one of the singers who came in last year, she literally just had a baby. Another one is pregnant, like another one is, you know, older than I thought and like is actually like coming back after like 20 years of not being in school, and I was like, "Damn, you go, girl." And like so many people are in different points in their life that it's like when you're this 25-year-old, coming into or you come into grad school, maybe if you come right out of undergrad, maybe you're like 22 or 23. But like you expect so much from graduate academia in terms of like socialization, and honestly sometimes it just doesn't happen, which is
Right.
unfortunate. But I also think that having Perry's class was
Perry's class was
huge.
great.
Yeah. Can you
I don't think anyone at Stony Brook should skip Perry's
no,
class,
oh my
even if they can.
God, seriously, do not do it. Okay, so if anybody is not a Stony Brook person and you're listening to this, Perry's class is this is full circle right now, because it's basically the theory and oral skills class for Stony Brook. And you can, like, test out of it if you are able.
If you have perfect pitch or you were, really good.
Right. And you just are, you're that good and you don't want to take it, or you live far away or whatever, you're really trying to get out of it.
You didn't quit sight singing after your sophomore year of undergrad.
Right. But, like, also, not for nothing, it's also one of the only classes where you're with, like, the whole incoming class for master's and doctoral students. Like, that's really the only exposure you have to everybody 3 times a week, and you see everybody, and even sometimes you don't see everybody because there's actually 2 sessions, like a earlier one and a later one. So it's like your main source of socialization sometimes, but it's,
right.
That is so, I think, under talked about in terms of, or just not talked about enough when it comes to graduate school and its unique challenges, and I think Stony Brook actually does a really good job about collaboration. Like, it's not that we don't know each other and we don't collaborate and stuff. There's a ton of ensembles. There's a ton of opportunities to collaborate, which I have a question for you, Kyle, after I finish this thought. But it's tough to not be in that, like, we all live here and we're all stuck here and we all practice here and we all, have our same kind of stages of life here and we're all doing this. It's totally different than undergrad. 100%, and everybody has different goals and different, some people are literally, like, in their mid-30s and are like, I'm just here because I need to, keep my other degree. I need a master's to keep it or whatever. And some people are like, I'm here because, whatever. Like, some people literally, I remember one person, like, came over from, I think they were from England or somewhere around there, but basically was just like, yeah, I'm playing with this, like, really cool gig right now, and I'm just like, maybe I would try it out, maybe I'll study with this person because, we've got the Emerson String Quartet here, so I thought I'd come over and, start a degree,
Right.
Damn. But I want
to say one quick thing
go
before
ahead.
we pivot to your question about grad school, especially because I think this is the most useful for folks who are are in undergrad or did undergrad and are looking at grad schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to have Heidi and I's message be entirely doom and gloom.
Oh no, not at all.
Like, grad school is but one thing I would say that I think is very important is something that I wish I understood about, Stony Brook or about looking for graduate schools, because so much they talk about, like, you want to make sure you have a teacher you really like, and they, I think that's, like, the big thing is, like, looking for, in our fields, like, a professor you study with. In other fields, it's like, who's going to be the professor who's essentially your advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And the, like, prestigiousness of the school or the location of the school or, what else is oftentimes talked about. But I think that it's really critical and important to really try to, like, understand what the school's sort of, like, general culture and vibe is like, because even if, you have a really fantastic teacher, and even if you have, a location that really makes sense, or other things, like finances were, a part of the decision of why I ended up going to Stony Brook as well.
Mm-hmm.
Even if, a lot of those things are lined up, if you don't really like, if you're, like, looking for something that's going to be more, inherently social, I think that, grad school can be more isolating and different because of some of the things Heidi said, but also Stony Brook is, like, a particular place like that, right? It's a commuter school.
Mm-hmm.
Not even a lot of the undergrads aren't, like, in that community, just, like, staying and hanging around there. A lot of people from different parts of Long Island or even in New York. And so if you don't really understand that that's what you're getting into, that can be really weird experience. And even if you have, like, other things that should set you up to be very successful, if you're just not happy where you're at, or you just don't like the environment you're in, it can be very difficult to be like, I need to be my best self when I don't really feel like I'm in a community I like being in. And I think that was, like, I loved a lot of the people in a lot of the classes and a lot of the stuff that I did at Stony Brook. That was, like, very much of my experience was, like, UGA was such a big community and such a, like, involved community of people who were, like, in the town that they were there, and there was, like, stuff that was, like, a part of the campus, and the campus, I think, was generally very, like, interactive and supportive. And then also the city had a lot of, like, great stuff with it was related to the school or related to townies or just, the culture of the place there. And I didn't realize until it was gone, like how much that was like really like a driving force for me for being like inspired and feeling like engaged and like, doing like the hard work of like being an artist, even when like you're like, I'd rather just like do nothing and eat Cheetos, which is also super satisfying. But it's, I guess not. You're vegan, so no Cheetos.
Yeah.
for how you eat,
But it's all good. I totally get that, and I think that's huge.
Yeah.
For sure.
TLDR, like get a good vibe.
Yeah.
Vibe check your potential universities.
Yeah. And I think honestly, for me, being in the performance department and also being in the vocal department, because we put on so many performances, and this might be different for other mediums, but there is a level of that because it's a small program and there's about, I think right now there's like 8 to 10 of us or 12 or something, depending on if you count the advanced students. But there is a small community there, and I think that was big for me. But I totally get it, coming from a composer and your standpoint, whereas it's like more academic work where you're not, spending hours and hours in rehearsal with each other and, getting late night coffee after your performance or going out for drinks, when honestly I think that's also one of the downfalls of Stony Brook is like the bars and like the places to go are just not close together. Like,
right.
It's so annoying. Like you have to like drive 15 minutes to get anywhere, and it's like, God, could we just like fix this? Like, I'm so desperate for social interaction. Like, geez, like even Country Corner is like at least a 5 to 10 minute drive from the campus.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? God, I'm sick of it.
Yeah, then it's like people who are drinking and you want to make sure people get home safe. And
I know, I hate driving like to a bar or somewhere because I'm like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna have like one beer and then wait 3 hours and like, that's it,
Yeah.
But anyway, I have a question for you, and I think this is going to be our last.
I'm excited about your question.
Yes, I am too. It literally is the biggest question I've ever asked anyone, so
oh, great.
I'm just kidding. It's literally not. But
I'm very nervous now.
It's literally not. It's literally not. But so we were talking about collaborations and composition and those kinds of aspects of your life. What is it like for you to work with your friends or to work with your colleagues? I know you've composed for SputterBox, which is a small ensemble that some of our friends are in and have created in the past couple of years. Like, what is it like to create for people who are also trying to find themselves as musicians and trying to create in their own right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a weird social dynamic. So sometimes you get, to do stuff with people who like want to do the thing that you do, and then they're really great, and that's just like the best experience. So like I met a guy at this music festival I was at years ago. This guy's named Luke Aucther. I'm not going to platform the music festival, but I will platform him. His name's Luke Aucther, and he's a great pianist. And I wanted him to write him this piano piece where the idea was we're supposed to write piano etudes. And I was thinking, well, I'm not a pianist, and most other composers here have studied piano or at least play decently, and I don't, not at all. So I'm not going to really get some sort of like physical technicality aspect that they're going to get. But a lot of the stuff that I was doing at the time, and I was really interested in, was like involving in like performers making creative decisions and things that are manipulatable. And so I wrote a like creative etude where I gave him like sections of music and asked him to like reorder it, and then I like set some like larger parameters. But I was saying like, yeah, like repeat these things or order them as you please. And when you like meet someone who's like, ends up being a really good friend and is really enthusiastic about what you do, it's just awesome because it's like, you want to build a good thing. And when you get someone who's like going to do a great job and then also is like really enthusiastic about what you do, it's awesome. I had a sort of similar experience with the Stony Brook thing I wrote for their little miniatures series with Instagram. And I sent them kind of a weird thing, kind of related to a lot of the stuff I do that's a little bit more up in the air. And essentially what I did is ask them to play like kind of musical telephone. I gave graphic scores to I think Catherine interpreted them first, and then she passes it to Alina, and then Alina passes it to Peter, and so Catherine records the sounds based on the graphic scores, and then she sends just her audio and not the scores to Alina. Alina tries to copy what Catherine's doing, and then sends just her audio to Peter, and then they did this in a number of rounds, and then we stitched the final stuff together, and. When you send that to some group of your friends, you think like my friends are probably going to be more patient for me about something like this than strangers, but I also don't really want to like upset my friends by giving them this thing that isn't really what people normally do with like performing music. That's not like dots and lines that say like play these rhythms here and play these notes here. And so they said they ended up like at first were like a little bit like skeptical, and then they ended up really loving it and like liked how it turned out. And so that was also really satisfying, but it's you get in this weird dynamic where it's like, I want to ask people to do weird and creative things, especially lately. And you're really going to run into situations where performers are either like very excited about that and really like engage and just in the process. Like I want to write an art song where like the singer like orders text and, the accompanist orders like emotional effective sections of the piece to like kind of create their own sort of narrative out of something instead of me giving them one. But like someone's either going to be very engaged by that process and find like it allows them a lot of expression and interest, or they're going to be like, dude, why can't you just like tell me what to do? My job is to like make things sound good, so
well, I think
it's a range of things, but
100%. It's huge to create something, and then also performers are also creating it, which is, I think, I love when the conversation comes into graphic notation, you know what I mean? Because we were just talking so much about music theory, and obviously if you're not a musician, music theory is basically like super watered down. It's like the notes and the rhythms that appear on the page and how to interpret them and, their function and blah, blah, blah. But, what Kyle is doing and what a lot of modern composers and living composers are doing is they're trying to create new things, all of these things that have been written down centuries ago are just that. They've been written down and they're already done. And like, people who are creative in this field are trying to uncover new expressions of emotions and expressions of things. And you mentioned that that piece that you wrote for Catherine and Alina and Peter, which is SputterBox for people who don't know. And I loved that piece because I had no idea that it wasn't written out. You know what I mean? Like, it's super interesting to hear it and then to understand, like, where the origins came from. And I actually have had my very first experience with graphic notation as a performer in the past couple of years. And it can be frustrating at times to perform graphic notated pieces because you, as a musician, kind of thrive off of those parameters in a way, and you are able to create this box for yourself and then grow within it. But then when those parameters are taken away, it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't know what you mean or what you want, or but that's another layer of it. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. And I think that like it really depends on like sort of the culture of what kind of musicianship you're involved in. Like, you ask like people who like playing jazz to improvise, and like they want to do that and they love to do it and they feel comfortable. But you ask like some classical musicians to improvise, and this is like a relative meme, right? People always talk about this difference. Yeah. And some of them want to do it and they're like enthusiastic, and some of them are like, I want to know what I'm playing and I want to sound perfect. And because they're really good at that. They're really good at being this like almost like detailed technical painter or tattooer, right? They're like, I'm going to make you a photo realistic of this thing that you put on a page, but orally. And some people are like more interested in sort of things that are allowed to be a little bit messier but a little bit more explorative. And I think like when you're talking about like working with performers, it's kind of like understanding what they are and aren't interested or willing to do. And I don't know, I had these professors at this music festival I won't platform who were like, why would you give them open-ended things like this? Why wouldn't you just do, construct it this way, but then find the best version and then give them the best version, and you'll get more performances that way? And I'm like, well, that's not really what I'm interested in. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, but you're going to get less people to work on your music. And I'm like, I'm okay with that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's maybe not a career move, but it's also sort of like, I want to like, and I think some of that comes from a background of like, my earliest musical experience was like playing in these like, you know, like punkish metal type things where like I would write riffs or write tunes and, you know, then bring it to a drummer and being like, hey, can we just like work this out? Or like, I don't think this transition works. Can we like, you know, it wasn't like I'm, you know, this like creative author, genius, composer guy, and I'm
Right.
gonna
And you
make
have to do
these
it my
things
way.
because I'm the guy who should be in charge. It was like,
Yeah.
I wrote some stuff and I want to like work through it with you and I want to hear what you do and have you bring your own flavor to it. And I just find that like that collaborative process of like the experience to be just so much more satisfying.
For sure, dude. Yeah.
And I don't think anything's, you know, inherently more legitimate. But one of the things I do like, you know, you're talking about the SputterBox piece. You know, I don't think any of us really knew how it was going to come out, and I was really pleased with the result. And it reminds me of, and this is also going to be like a relatively generic thing to say, so I apologize, but you know, people talk about like John Cage a lot in the experimental music tradition, and one of the things that he talks about is sort of that he's writing music to kind of like discover what it sounds like instead of like, you know, like knowing, you know. He talked about like his favorite music is the music he hasn't heard yet, and then like, you know, there's Lou Harrison who talks about like, you know, experimental music is often like the R&D of the music field, where it's sort of like we're like trying things out and seeing how things can go, and yeah, I think that like especially like my approach to like the, you know, broad scale classical, you know, whatever that means, world, was more focused on that, because if, you know, if I want to make things that just sound really good, I'd rather just like listen to like a really well engineered like metal record, you know, that just like sounds great. It's been
Sure.
mixed death. It's
Well, yeah,
perfect, you know.
and that's its own
Like,
thing. Like everybody
right.
who is, you know, understanding of pop music and produced music and anything that has been put through a studio and like is made to sound a very specific way, like that's totally part of the genre. You know what I mean? Like that level of
Polish.
yeah, polish
Yeah.
and really chiseling down the sounds is like so specific to the music itself.
Yeah, and like mixing decisions are a big part of the artistry of any of those
Yeah.
genres. Just like how much you balance like panning and like what you do. I mean, especially when you have vocals involved in anything, and I'm sure as a singer you can sympathize with this. Like, how much you do or don't want to like let the vocals sit above musical space is something that I think is a really interesting series of decisions. That like I remember I was listening to an Iron Maiden album the other day. And it was surprising to me. It was like, oh yeah, you know, like there's these sections where the instrumental lines are a little bit more contrapuntal and a little bit like thinner, and they mix the vocals volume wise lower because they still cut through the mix, but it allows those like thinner instrumental sections to sound louder because they are louder.
Right.
But then when they're playing more chord like stuff that's already saturating the space, the vocals are a little bit heavier in the mix because it's you know, it would be harder to hear them over this like saturated space, and the saturated space already feels loud because it's like full. And so like it's just tiny little decisions like that makes so much of the artistry of like mixed music. And I think that's like a really wonderful form of art making. And I think when I was coming to like, you know, live, like chamber music type stuff, I was much more interested in like the community experience and the collaborative element. And like, that's why I think I was interested in aleatory for a while, and I kind of led me towards like performers making creative decisions or performers doing things that influence other performers as the main focus of that, because I wanted to like allow performers to really like, you know, interact and express with each other. And even in subtle ways, I remember I wrote this percussion quartet for Cisum Percussion in Brooklyn, and they're great. Cisum, Cisum. They're a really good group of folks. They're like a percussion collaborative instead of a quartet now. But yeah, they've been a number of performers. They're really good, and they put on composer festivals every so often. I think it's like every other year. And like even like giving them something small, like instead of me writing out a big, you know, like thinned out texture section, I gave them a whole bunch of stuff to play, and I said like just kind of play these cells and just feel it out as an ensemble to like let it get less dense and quieter. And like just telling them like, look, you don't have to count this. You should just listen to each other, and you guys are going to decide like based on the room, based on, you know, the environment, like you can make that decision just like listening to each other and feeling it. And that's going to be I think, a more interesting process and a more organic sound than, be me saying, all right, we're gonna slowly thin things out over 60 measures.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Um,
I think that if you are listening to this podcast and you are not in, like, you're not in the contemporary music world, or you have no idea what we're talking about right now, I highly encourage you to go into this field and just, like, search things. Like, we mentioned John Cage, we mentioned some small ensembles like SputterBox, and you said Cisum?
Cisum, yeah,
Cisum.
Cisum.
And we'll link all of this stuff, so if you're interested, you can check them out or whatever. But do explore. I feel like it's really, when I tell people about, like, my performances of contemporary music or whatever, like, they have this, kind of like bee-boo bop kind of music, like like kind of atonal, very
plunks and beeps.
Yeah, and I mean, there is an element of that for sure, and you're not wrong in singing that or seeing that it might be a little bit far out for what you're normally accustomed to. But I think, Kyle, what you're saying, which is really important, is that the interactions that are taking place and the emotions that are taking place and the kind of even just compositional techniques that are taking place here are really unique and are very freeing in terms of musical, if you're searching for some kind of musical product. And the whole world of contemporary music is very interesting to me, and honestly, I know very, very little about it, and I'm literally in a program in which contemporary music is a big deal. So, like, there's a lot to know and there's a lot to learn, and yeah, it's just very interesting to me, and I think that a lot of people get overwhelmed, or they're turned off by some of the abrasiveness or some of the far-reachingness of some of these things, but that is, dive into those fears, man. Like, sit in it. Why do you feel uncomfortable with that? Why are you feeling this way? Maybe that was the intention for you to feel uncomfortable, or, maybe your connections with traditional music makes you reject some things, and, like, maybe that's something you need to look at within yourself, And
I have two sort of like disclaimers for people who are curious or like even willing to try out like contemporary music and music. And one, an unrelated disclaimer, is that there's a lot of music that's like brand new that doesn't sound like harsh or scary or whatever else. So like there's also stuff that's like beautiful and sonorous, and it's also stuff that just like sounds like old music too. It's a wide field, and there's a lot of people doing things. Like Victoria Cheah has a piece called "I Watched Her Smile Her Hand." It's on YouTube. There's like a score-follower version of that. Victoria Cheah. Cheah is Cheah. And it's like beautiful and gorgeous and not like, like harsh and plunky, right? And so there's like a lot of stuff that's like really, really wonderful, interesting art that's not necessarily like quote unquote as challenging from a harmonic perspective or like a timbral perspective. That being said, I like to kind of make two disclaimers for people, because I think that the two kind of biggest turnoffs, I think, especially for new music, is that stuff will be a little bit like strange or new, and most commonly the one people run into is they get a little bit scared off of like dissonance, in harmonic dissonance, and I understand that. But also, sometimes like there's like like Eliane, oh god, Rainy's gonna hate me for mispronouncing this, but it's like Radigue. It's Radigue. She's like a really slow, long form electronic composer, and just like being in a space of like slow and folding like ambient music, like for like an hour, can be a really strange experience to someone who's not doing that, right? And so I think the first thing to acknowledge in my first disclaimer of two is that all of these experiences are probably going to be pretty different from other experiences you had. And I kind of liken that to like the first time you drank black coffee or the first time you had beer. It's just not a sensation that you're used to compared to other things, right? You're used to things that are liquids either having no flavor or being sweet, right? Yeah. And so when you have something that's very bitter, or like with beer, it's bitter and bready, it's kind of like, especially when you're younger, it's like, what is this? Why do people like this? Yeah. It's like, I love unpleasant.
That. Yeah.
And then like, but I think a lot of people continue because they're told, oh, it's okay to not, to feel weird about it at first, but there's a lot of value here if you keep trying it. And you'll kind of find out like, oh, I like my coffee with a little bit of milk. I don't, but I used to, right? And so, or like, you might walk your way into it, or you say like, it took me a long time to understand, like, there's certain types of beer that I love and certain types of beer that I don't love. And like, it just took patience and like, being able to say like, I might not love all these things at first, but I want to keep trying them because I want to understand what other people get out of them.
Yeah, right.
And then my second thing about disclaimers about new music is that it is absolutely okay and often intentional to feel lost in any form of music that you don't already have a lot of experience with. And one of the things that I love, Jackson Pollock says, I don't get why people I don't know what the exact quote is, but he's like, I don't get why people like panic about not understanding or getting the paintings. And obviously he's like the splatter paint guy, right?
Yeah.
He says, you don't go outside and look at a field of flowers and freak out that you don't know what they mean.
Yeah,
like you just look at them. He's like, I think if people just looked at the paintings, they'd like them. And so I think similarly with a lot of music, like if you didn't really think, like, I think oftentimes people hear music that's like quote unquote complex sounding and they're thinking, oh, I need to have like galaxy brain from that brain meme to understand this and to like get it. And honestly, the galaxy brain move there is just like listen and try to see if you enjoy it and try to see if you could enjoy it. And sometimes the answer is yes and sometimes the answer is no, and both of those are fine.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you a question, Heidi.
Oh, okay.
Especially because I want to get a little bit off the music train because we've talked about that almost exclusively, which wasn't actually my expectation. I was thinking like, I'm not going to platform myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to chat about music. I'm just going to like meme the whole time.
Well, yeah, it is what
that is not been the case at all. But I'll ask you, I saw this on Facebook. If you could take a movie and replace all of the characters with Muppets except for one human, what movie would you do this? So it's all Muppets, but one of the original actors still in the movie, and everyone else is Muppets.
Oh, wow. Well, first I have a confession. I have no experience with Muppets, but other than I know what they are, and
yeah, me too.
Like I've never seen like those silly kid movies like Muppet Treasure Island and things like that. Like I know what that is. But
yeah, I have no awareness of it either. Okay. I just think it's a fun question.
Yes. So I think I would probably choose. I think it would be funny to choose like a early 2000s like female comedy kind of deal, like Freaky Friday.
Yes.
And like and have the switch between like the mom and the daughter, like, spoiler alert if you don't know Freaky Friday, but like have them be one is the Muppet and one is like an actual person. Like maybe Lindsay Lohan can stay, but Jamie Lee Curtis has to be a Muppet.
Yeah.
And like everybody else is Muppets too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so like a Muppet also posing as someone who's been switched into her human teenage daughter's body.
That's great. Yeah, I was trying to think about a thousands comedy take on this because I've been thinking about this a lot, like the past like day and a half. And I kept thinking like if there was a good like dude comedy, like Dodgeball or something like that would work for this. And maybe Dodgeball because like the sports element I think would be fun. But like I think most of them like it just kind of seems like no, this would just fit. It wouldn't really like make it much more nonsensical. Yeah. So that's a great take. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. These are the inner machinations of my mind. But believe it or not, we have been speaking for an hour and 13 minutes so far. So we're going to wrap it on up, as the kids say. We're gonna
goodbye.
Well, before you leave, can you tell everybody how to find you and what you exist as on the interwebs?
Oh, yeah. I think I technically have a website, but I don't know if I've paid for the domain. So if people want to, honestly, if people want to hear my music, instead of finding me in a public space, I just really rather have someone reach out to me personally. I'm much more interested in making friends than I am making fans. And I don't think I'm really making fans at this point in my life anyways. So I'm on Facebook as Kyle Lewis. I imagine most people who listen to this probably know you, so we'll be mutual friends. And I'm on Instagram as K.E.Lewis. Lewis is Lewis. So those are probably the most immediate like online places to find me. I think if you search Kyle Lewis composer or Kyle Eugene Lewis, I show up on Google. If you just search Kyle Lewis, it shows up for the Seattle Mariners. baseball player.
Nice.
And if you just search Kyle Lewis and really dig, you're going to then find there's a soap opera character named Kyle Lewis who is a happily married gay man, which, that's man,
not you.
I can't say that I'm doing that well. But
oh, man. Well, thank you so much for being here. It has been quite the chat. I also did not expect this to be a predominantly musical chat.
Yeah, no, not at all.
For sure not. But like, it is what it is. And the whole vibe with this podcast, as my listeners, my 12 listeners, all of you know, is that no rules here, okay? We do whatever the heck we want, and that's the only rule, okay? So I'm allowed to talk about music. We're allowed to not talk about music. We do whatever we want. Sometimes we talk about Muppets in alternate movies, okay? So deal with that. But anyway, Kyle, it has been wonderful to have you here on the pod. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm gonna sign us out here. So let's see. What do I have to tell you, people? If you want to support the podcast, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, this YouTube channel here, if you're listening on YouTube, and like the video, share the video if you want. I don't care. I'm not trying to pressure you, but if you want to support the podcast, that's how you do it. And yeah, I'll try and link as many of the things that Kyle and I spoke about in this episode down below in the description, or, somewhere else in any way that I post this, so you'll have access to those things. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, night, whenever you happen to be listening to this. And this has been another episode of the Paper Soprano podcast. Thanks so much for being here, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Okay, I never know how to end these podcasts, so I'm just going to say bye. Love you, mean it.